prayed about what house to buy, and we bought a house. God led us to it, got us a marvelous deal on it. It's the kind of house I loved. It's an old house that I could work on and fix up. First thing I did, I said, I just see in my mind what this house was going to look like when I got finished. Didn't look that way now, but when I finished, and I started with a lawn out in the front, there was just an old tree that had rotted and fell down, and I was going to fill in that little hole in the ground, and just, there was still a little bit of a stump. I was going to cut that out, fill the hole in, make it nice and smooth. I forgot, since we prayed, I forgot to check first to see who lived around me. Because I trusted the Spirit of God, you know, that He would take care of those little things like that. And I'm going to tell you who lived right around the house I bought. On my left was a Catholic couple, their family. And on my right, I told you just backwards. On my right was a Catholic couple. On my left was a retired Methodist preacher. We became dear friends. And right across the street was a widow lady. And next door to her is the one I want to tell you about. It was an old, we used to, when his kids called them old haunted looking houses. Now we had a fellow in our town that everybody used to laugh at. Not everybody, you know what I mean, but generally, and the kids, we'd throw snowballs at him in the wintertime. He was weird. He was strange, you know. He was, a lot of people call him town jokes. They're in every town, I notice. This fellow's name was Norman. Old Norman. He was 6'2" thereabouts, and he wore an old felt-looking hat that had so much dirt and oil in it you couldn't tell what it looked like originally. Wore overalls that were just grease-soaked. He had old house shoes that he'd flop around town in, sometimes rubber galoshes, and they just flop when he walked up and down the street. And he'd walk real fast up and down Main Street like this. Just, and real fast, and then he'd stop and he'd talk to himself. I said, hey. And he'd do that all over Main Street. And people would say, boy, he's weird, isn't he? I didn't even think anybody lived there at first. And that day that I was out there working on my tree stump, going to fix the yard, in my coveralls, barefoot, my wife and kids had gone uptown to the grocery store or something. I'm digging around the tree stump, going to saw it out. And I look over there. He walked out of that house, and I saw that he lived there, and I said, oh, no. I said, Lord, that's Weird Norman over there. I said, you had me by the house across the street from Weird Norman. I said, now, Lord, he's, you know, I don't know exactly what's wrong. We hear a lot of rumors, but I got 2 daughters, and sometimes I got to be, and he's strange. Hey, you know, he might harm them, I thought. And so I watched him. He came down to come out to the sidewalk and go uptown or somewhere, and I said, hi, Norman. He looked at me. And he went, took off down the street. A couple of days later, I was out there working on the same tree stump. He came out again. This time, he came out to work on his lawnmower out in the backyard. Something was wrong with it. It wouldn't run. He worked with it. He looked like he was getting disgusted, and I was watching him. I thought, boy, he really is strange. And then he did something that I'll never forget for eternity. He stood up as tall as he could. He looked like the Incredible Hulk. He raised his arms. He looked at me. He glared at me, and he ran from the back of his yard where I could just see him out to the side of the house, down the side of the house, right at me, stopping at his sidewalk. Praise God, he ran at me and screamed at the top of his lungs. He went, ah! My heart was going, I had a little tool in my hand my brother-in-law made in the shop class at the high school. He'd given it to me. And I remember saying, now, Lord, I know we're supposed to love everybody. But if he comes over here, Lord, I'm going to defend myself. He went back to the lawnmower. And he fooled around with it a little more. Got angry some more. Ran at me again. Stopped at his sidewalk every time. 3 times he did that. 3 times he stopped at his sidewalk. Suddenly, the presence of the Lord settled all over me. It seemed that faith or confidence, so I don't know the right word, more than I normally possessed, it began to well up in me, and I did something that surprised even me. I got up, barefoot, coveralls, walked across that street, and walked up to Norman in his backyard by his lawnmowers. I said, you having trouble with your lawnmower, Norman? He looked at me, and he said, you having trouble with your lawnmower, Norman? I said, I just said that. I said, I'm not much of a lawnmower mechanic, Norman. And I heard him say, I'm not much of a mechanic, Norman. Looked at it. Cleaned the spark plug, tightened the screw or two. I don't know anything about a lawnmower. And I prayed and pulled that rope, and it ran like it'd been to the repair shop. Just hummed, just... And he did something for the first time I saw when he grinned real big. I saw a green and yellow tooth right here. And I saw one over here and one here and one here. And those spectacles he had on looked like Coke bottles. They were thick, and he had whiskers, had that old hat. But there he was grinning at me. And after that, every time he'd come out of the house, and I'd say, "Hi, Norman," he'd go, "Hello." And then he'd take off down the street. Men in my town said, "I reckon what's the matter with Norman?" Well, he's in the barber shop. You know, that's where you find out things in town. And especially our small town. And one fellow said, "I know what it is. Norman was hit by a Greyhound bus once, I heard that." Another fellow said, No, Fred, that's not it at all. What happened to Norman was he was brilliant. He was a genius. Everybody in the barber shop was... He said, in fact, he was such a genius that his mind exploded one day. But God didn't care about all that. He said to me, by beginning to put a little seed of a seed way down here deep in my heart for the first time, he said, witness Jesus to him. Well, okay, Lord, one night after church, it is tradition in our town to go to the Dairy Queen. And the scene was always the same. You know, whoever got out first, whoever had the 20-minute service got there first, got their ice cream, sat down. Then the church that had the 25-minute service, they followed, and they got there next, they got their ice cream. They always waved at one another. "Hi, Bill. Hi, John. Hi, Betty. How's your family?" "Fine." "How was church?" "Oh, wonderful." Never had heard anybody have a bad service. And everybody be waving and smiling in the Dairy Queen. And everybody be eating their ice cream. I've done it myself. I'm not saying anything about my neighbors I wouldn't say about myself. I was doing it myself. I was sitting there eating ice cream one night, and I was smiling at everybody. Guess who walked in right in the middle of all that? Thank you. He comes, gets his ice cream cone. He always sits there right in the same seat. And every Christian in the place, especially Brother Mike, who travels around the country lifting up Jesus and singing adoration, I rushed over to him and gave him the 4 spiritual laws. No. I did what everybody else did. I act like I didn't see him. We gave him room. We didn't talk about him or to him about Jesus. I've always wondered why, now that I tell this story, I thought, well, I guess it's because if somebody saw me talking to him, they might think I'm as strange as he is. And the Spirit of the Lord spoke to me and said, quietly, and don't make a show out of it, go over and tell him about Jesus. I said, Carmel, pray for me. I'm going to go talk to Norman. She's getting used to that kind of action, and she prayed, and I went over there, and I sat down, and real quick, and I said, "Hi, Norman, you remember who I am?" He said, "You remember who I am?" I said, Norman, listen.